Hi there, folks. We thought we'd let you in, even though Phil has yet to be able to make it in. He's having some technical difficulties, apparently. I've not yet heard from him directly, but word of mouth is he's trying to get into the meeting. So we thought in the meantime, you could just join us and I would tell you a little bit about the store.
Well, I know Amy's there, but they're
My name's Michael. I'm the events coordinator and publicist at Annie Bloom's Books.
Okay, here I am.
Oh,
I made it. We couldn't figure out how to get on, so.
oh, you're Melanie Nelson. Okay, I did not recognize you because of that reason.
Well, I'm using her computer because
Gotcha.
I
Okay,
don't have one with a camera.
I understand. Okay, cool.
Okay, so we're all set.
Yay, good. Phil's here. All right, I'll continue with my introduction. Good to see you, Phil. Annie Bloom's is located in Portland, Oregon, in the heart of Multnomah Village. We've been around for 43 years now. We are still thriving thanks to all of the support from our wonderful customers. We're open weekdays from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and weekends from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Our website is always open. You can shop day and night at annieblooms.com. I'm going to drop into the link, into the chat there, the link for the event for tonight where you can buy both of these authors' books. Dana Haynes is also with us. We'd really appreciate your support in buying these books. Phil, I know, is happy to sign and personalize books if you buy them from us. That would be great. We offer curbside pickup, in-store pickup, local delivery, and a couple of different shipping options. We have some great events coming up on Thursday, March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. Local author Jeff Wallach will be here reading from his new novel, Everyone Here is From Somewhere Else. It's the follow-up to Mr. Wizard, a standalone story continuing the tale of middle-aged brothers Philip and Spencer Elliott, who undertake a quest inspired by their late mother to discover wonderful things. On March 21st, that's a Monday, at 7 p.m., Randolph Splitter, another local author, will be here reading from his new novel, The Third Man. From Vienna in the 1930s to England in the 1940s and back, The Third Man is a story of dispossession, refuge, and the search for justice and humanity. And on the following evening at 5 p.m., a little earlier than usual, local author Mark McDonald will be here with his sister Rachel Elliott on the East Coast. Their book is Love and Genetics. It's a memoir about adoption and connecting after many, many years apart. Tonight, of course, we have Phillip Margolin presenting his new Robin Lockwood mystery, The Darkest Place. He's going to be in conversation, as I mentioned earlier, with fellow Portland thriller author Dana Haynes. We'll have a Q&A at the end, so feel free to type questions in the chat and I'll read those aloud, or you can click on the little blue hand icon that's in the reactions menu down at the bottom of the screen if you're daring enough to ask a question live. Let me tell you about The Darkest Place before we dive in here. Robin Lockwood is an increasingly prominent defense attorney in the Portland community. A Yale graduate and former MMA fighter, she's becoming known for her string of innovative and successful defense strategies. As a favor to a judge, Robin takes on the pro bono defense of a reprehensible defendant charged with even more reprehensible crimes. But what she doesn't know, what she can't know, is how this one decision, this one case, will wreak complete devastation on her life and plans. As she recovers from those consequences, Robin heads home to her small town of Elk Grove and the bosom of her family. Well, I don't want to give too much away. So we'll leave you with that little teaser for the beginning of that. Phillip Margolin has written over 20 novels, most of them New York Times bestsellers, including Gone But Not Forgotten, Lost Lake, and Violent Crimes. And he's read at Annie Bloom's a million times. In addition to being a novelist, he was a longtime criminal defense attorney with decades of trial experience, including a large number of capital cases. He lives here in Portland, Oregon. Dana Haynes has spent more than 20 years in Oregon newspaper newsrooms and also served as a spokesman for the mayor of Portland. His first thriller, Crashers, won the Spotted Owl Award from Friends of Mystery as 2010's best mystery or thriller written by a Northwest writer. St. Nicholas Salvage and Wrecking marked his debut with Blackstone Publishing in March 2019. The sequel, Sirocco, which is his current novel still out, a serial bomber is wreaking havoc, more wreaking of havoc, throughout Europe. Former New York City cop Michael Finnegan and former Spanish assassin Catalin Fierro, the brains behind St. Nicholas Salvage and Wrecking, a covert bounty hunting operation based in Cyprus, may be the only ones who can stop the carnage. please welcome Phil and Dana.
Well, thank you. We're really glad to be here. I wanted to say too that we're working from home, as so many people are. During tonight's presentation, you may hear from my cat Violet telling you she has not yet been fed. In the mystery world, we refer to that as an unreliable narrator. I'm going to ask Phil some questions. I'm also going to give you some information about Phil and Phil's fascinating background. And I need you to know that these bits of information about Phil's background, some of them are actually accurate and some of them I've simply made up. And Michael, if you wanted somebody to be accurate, you shouldn't have hired a fiction writer to do this, right? So that's on you. The interesting thing about Phil, before I go to the questions, is man served in the Peace Corps, volunteered in Liberia, West Africa, before he was a famous trial lawyer. So with that little bit of bits out of the way, Phil, first question for you is: the darkest place has one of my favorite dedications ever. Do you want to read the dedication out loud and or talk about it? And it's apropos of tonight.
You know what? I don't have a book with, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I have it. Let me read it out loud.
Why don't you read it? Because
Okay.
and hold on for a second, because I just got a thing that this Mac might need to get plugged in. Hey, Melanie?
I got it.
I hate Zoom calls.
We're going to ask Melody to actually sit in and listen, because I think the computer likes her more than you, and they can still fear.
I don't know how to do this stuff at all, so I'm totally dependent. Either my daughters help me out or Melanie's help me out.
How are we
So
doing? Much better? Okay.
is it
Here we go.
okay? Now we're
Here's the dedication. Writing a book is exciting and thoroughly enjoyable, but it's also a lonely business. I spend every day in my office with the blinds drawn and the door shut, staring at a computer monitor. That's why I love book tours. I get to mingle with readers and answer their questions, and independent bookstores are my favorite place to do a signing, a la Annie Bloom's. Ever since the COVID struck, independent bookstores have been fighting for their lives, for letting readers to browse the shelves, and they've had to invent ways to survive. I live in Oregon. I'm happy to report that my favorite stores are still in business and starting to reopen. Phil, talk for a second, if you would, about why independent bookstores are so damn important in our world.
Well, you know, I read a very scary article recently that said that by 2025, Amazon might have 70%, I think, of the book business. And that would mean that they could control pretty much what publishers publish. And what I love about independent bookstores is they recommend books that maybe aren't bestsellers. The people that run them are also very knowledgeable. I still remember, there's a very funny story that, I don't know, Annie Proulx wrote a book called The Shipping News. That was a Pulitzer Prize winner. And this story about someone going into a Barnes and Noble and asking for the shipping news, and the clerk sending them over to where the newspapers are. That would not happen in an independent bookstore. So I just really, I have nothing against Barnes and Noble, but or Amazon, but I just think it's these smaller stores where it's more intimate. People know books. They're really valuable. And if they disappear, you'd have one person or one organization, Amazon, telling everybody what to read. So, it's bad enough if you go in the airports now, they have such a limited number of paperbacks, and they're all the bestseller list, James Patterson and et cetera. So it's you can go into a bookstore and get a wide variety, like Annie Bloom's. I always like to go in there and browse the mystery shelves. So if the independents have to close down because Amazon's taking all the business, or Barnes and Noble, it's a problem.
Here, here. Another question for Phil before I do. Another little interesting fact about his background. And again, I remember I made some of these up. Phil is a 3-time Nobel Peace Prize winner. So that's interesting.
It was just 2.
Yeah. Yeah, I stand corrected. I have special shoes for that.
Mm.
The Darkest Place is the 5th book in the series featuring defense attorney and former fighter Robin Lockwood. Tell us a little bit about Robin.
So Robin's been, I really have enjoyed developing Robin as a character. And the way she originated is this. I moved from HarperCollins over to St. Martin's, and they wanted me to do a series. So I have 2 other series, Dana Cutler and Amanda Jaffe, and they're very strong women characters. But they frequently get in, and my standalones have several strong women in leads also. And they occasionally get into violent situations where they have to defend themselves. Well, in real life, if a man and a woman fight, the man's probably going to win. More upper body strength. Men probably have at some point either taken boxing or wrestled or done some sort of a combat sport. So I was thinking, I want to have a woman as the main character. And I was thinking, how would I make it realistic if she got into a fight, for instance, and won? And I thought, well, if she was a professional fighter, if you had a woman who's a trained professional fighter and she fights a man, that would change the odds tremendously in the woman's favor. So I started thinking about that. And so I gave Robin a sort of unusual background. She grows up in Elk Grove, a small Midwestern town, and her dad and 3 brothers, older brothers, are all championship wrestlers. So when she gets to high school, she wants to be on the wrestling team, but a number of the parents complain because they don't want their boy children in close physical contact with the girl children. So they convince the school board, and the school board says, well, you can't be on the wrestling team. So her dad hires a lawyer, and they sue, and they win. And she's allowed to go on the wrestling team with the support also of the coach and a number of the wrestlers on the team who say that they don't have any problem with it at all. So she actually gets on the wrestling team. She becomes the first girl to place in a boys conference in the state. She comes in 3rd her senior year. But then she goes to college. Now, she's also really smart. She's a physics major in college. And the college, though, that she goes to has a top Division I wrestling team. So she knows she has no chance at all of making the team because these are nationally ranked college wrestlers. But she still likes combat sports, so she finds a gym where they have mixed martial arts. And by the time she graduates from college, she's ranked number 9 nationally and is fighting on television for UFC events in Las Vegas, on pay-per-view events. And so she gets into Yale Law School, which is the hardest law school to get into in the country. And she pays her tuition with money that she earns fighting on television. So I thought that'd be sort of an unusual background, a fun background. I'm working on a new book now where I even go back and to her last pay-per-view fight that bears on a plot that I've just started on it. It won't come out till I don't think 2023. But and in most of the books, there is a point where she does have to have some either a fight or use a gun or something to either defend herself or somebody that she's with. So that's the background.
Before I go on to the next question, another little fun fact about Phil. He graduated 1970 New York University School of Law, but for the last 2 years, he took night school and he made his living by teaching junior high school in the South Bronx, which I think everybody will agree would be more dangerous than Liberia.
It was the highest crime rate area in the city at the time. But I liked it. I got along great with the kids.
So going back to Robin Lockwood again, who's one of my favorite of your protagonists, does the audience need to read the other Robin books in the series first, or can they just jump right into this story and figure out what's going on?
No, every one of my books that is in a series, when I write it, I try to make it a standalone. I hate it when I find a new series that I like and I pick out book number 4 and I find I have no idea what is going on. So I do give a little bit of background so that if someone hasn't read any of the other Lockwood books, they can get up to speed, but you can basically read this. And I've been really pleased with some of the comments I've had on Goodreads where I've had reviews of Darkest Place and other books where they mention this is part of a series, but can be read as a standalone, because I really make an effort to do that.
Real briefly, can you talk just for a second about the other series and how they differ from Robin's series?
Yeah. First of all, I intentionally did not do a series for the longest time. And the reason for that is my third book, Gone But Not Forgotten, which was published in 1993, was a massive bestseller. And sold over 1 million copies and became a movie and just all this stuff. So when I was trying to figure out what my next book should be, my gut reaction was, well, Betsy Tannenbaum's the main character in that book, was that I should do another Betsy Tannenbaum serial killer book. And then I remembered Arthur Conan Doyle. And Arthur Conan Doyle hated Sherlock Holmes. He wanted to write historical novels, but anytime he wrote a book that didn't have Sherlock Holmes in it, people would say, well, when are you going to do another Sherlock? And they wouldn't read the book that he had put out. So I thought, well, if my next book with Betsy Tannenbaum is twice as successful, then I will be stuck writing Betsy Tannenbaum serial killer books until I die. And I have noticed that in a lot of series, the first book is fantastic. It has a great plot, terrific characters. But as the series goes on, the plots tend to disappear. And, the focus is, will the heroine marry the detective that she met 2 books ago, and what's going to happen to her mother who's in nursing home? And so the plots tend to go down and the personal life tends to go up. And I'm basically a plot guy. I do have decent character development, but it took a while. So anyway, after making the decision that I didn't want to do a sequel to Gone, I hope that if I wrote a good book that wasn't a sequel, people would like it, and they did. After Dark was another big New York Times bestseller. So then I intentionally wrote standalones until my 7th book was Amanda and Frank Jaffe, and it's called Wild Justice, and they are a father-daughter criminal defense team in Portland. And I really loved the Amanda Jaffe character. I thought she was great, but I intended that to be a standalone. Well, the next book that I wrote was The Associate, and the young protagonist, he's an associate in a law firm, gets arrested and charged with a murder that he didn't commit. So he needs a defense lawyer. And I was going to make one up, and then they said, wait a minute, I really like that Amanda character from the other book. So I put Amanda in a little cameo as the guy's defense lawyer. So she's off and on for about 75 pages. She makes appearances. The next book was Ties That Bind. And when I wrote the outline, and I always get an idea, get the ending, and then write a very extensive outline, it takes me 1 to 3 months. And so when I was doing the outline, the Jaffes were not in the book at all. But when I finished the outline, I said, that this would fit perfectly with Amanda and Frank Jaffe. And I had never had a book where I had to advance the life of one of my fictional characters. So I thought that would be an interesting challenge. So I wrote Ties That Bind with the Jaffes. And then periodically I would do standalones, and periodically I would put in a Frank and Amanda Jaffe, and there's about 5 of them. I think it's Fugitive, Proof Positive, and Violent Crimes are the other ones. The more interesting series started with Executive Privilege, which is one of my best books. And I got this idea in 1995. Could the president of the United States be a serial killer? And I thought it was a great idea, but I won't write a single word until I get the ending. And I had all sorts of thoughts about who the characters would be, and I had scenes, but I couldn't figure out if the president, how could he be a serial killer with the Secret Service around him all the time and reporters all the time? And so periodically I would make notes, but I just couldn't get it. And then in 2006, I was driving home from Black Butte on vacation, and I had just finished the book, and I was trying to figure out what my next book would be. And boing, into my head pops the ending to Executive Privilege. So that book came out 10 years after I got the original idea. And Dana Cutler is a fantastic character who was was an undercover policewoman who was brutalized by a biker gang that figured out that she was a policewoman. And so she gets involved. She gets into this mental hospital because of physical and mental problems that she has. And when she comes out, she just wants to take teeny weeny cases with no violence, and gets hooked up with this incredible plot where she begins to suspect that the president is a serial killer. And she's in, so that was again going to be a standalone, but it did so well that the people at HarperCollins said, could you do a sequel? And Brad Miller is one of the main characters in that book, and he gets a job as a clerk at the US Supreme Court at the very end of the book. So I said, oh, okay, well, I'll have something with the Supreme Court. So I had the White House, which is the executive branch. Then I did the Supreme Court, which is the judicial branch. But those clerkships are just a year, and I think there's a recession going on, and I didn't want Brad to be unemployed. I wanted him to have a job. So I got him a job in the US Capitol at the US Senate. And so that's the third book in the series, is Capital Murder. And then Dana was so popular, I did a fourth one, Sleight of Hand, where she's just in it. The other supporting characters from the other 3 books aren't there. So those are my 2 other series.
Another real interesting fact about Phil, he's calling us today from his home in Latvia. He doesn't actually speak any English, and he's answering all these questions phonetically. Melanie wrote them out for him. Fascinating guy.
Yeah, my original language is Russian, and actually I'm from the Ukraine, my ancestors. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's not good. So,
no, not at all.
Yeah.
Please take this next question in the spirit's intended. Most lawyers cannot write a cogent, interesting sentence if their lives are on the line. I mean, they can craft the world's greatest Brandeis brief, but a catchy story? How did you become the double threat, the lawyer who can craft a good yarn?
Oh, but the way I got into writing is bizarre. My whole writing career has been really weird. When I was in the Peace Corps between college and law school, and when I was in law school, as you heard, I was teaching full time and then taking a full 4 courses in the evening. And to get through in 3 years like the day guys, I had to go summers. So my last summer, I had, I think, 3 courses, and my wife got a job. She graduated from college and she got a job. So I didn't have to work. And then I had a job already in Oregon as a law clerk for the chief judge of the Oregon Court of Appeals. So I basically had a free summer, and I'd never had a free summer. I'd always worked since I was little. I had newspaper routes, and I was always doing some job. And I didn't know what to do with myself. And I'm a voracious reader. I read about 2 to 3 books a week. And that started in elementary school. I'm sort of addicted to reading. And because of that, I was in awe of writers, and it never even entered my head that I could write a book. So I decided that I would try to solve one of life's great mysteries that summer. And that was, how do these guys fill up 400 pages with words? It seemed like impossible. So I decided to write a novel based on my experiences in the Peace Corps in West Africa. And it took me about 2 years. One problem with being a lawyer is you're trained to be very objective and unemotional about your work. And reading that book unemotionally and objectively, I realized it wasn't very good. So, but I enjoyed the writing process. So it sort of became a hobby. Every once in a blue moon, I would write a short story. And then in my 30s, I got a short story published for the first time. And that gave me a little bit of courage, because I really didn't have any self-confidence that I'd ever be able to write something that people would, pay for. And I decided to try write a novel based on the Peyton Allen murders, which it's an Oregon case, but in my opinion, it is the single most bizarre and complex murder case in American history. I've done 30 homicides myself. I've read some of the true crime stuff, and I've never seen anything like Peyton Allen. And at the time in the 70s, there were no writers in Oregon. I think there was just a handful, and none of them were doing legal thrillers. So I decided I would take this little gem and try to fictionalize it. But I had never had any, I did have a writing course. I got a C+ in creative writing in college, and that was the only writing course I had. So I really didn't know what I was doing, and I had no idea what you would do with the book when you finished it. What do you do with the manuscript? And out of the blue, I got a call from Marty Bauer. And Marty had roomed next to me in law school my first year, and then we had a couple of classes second year, and then he sort of disappeared and I disappeared. We were, going nights. I got married and moved to Oregon, and he stayed in New York, and I had no idea what he was doing. And he called up and said, Phil, my wife and I are going to want to come out to Oregon on vacation. Can we get together? And I said, yeah, stay at the house and I'll take time off and show you the gorge and Mount Hood and stuff. So when I was driving him from the airport, I asked him what he was doing. And because I don't think I'd had any contact with him for 4 years or 5 years. And it turns out that Marty was one of 3 lawyers for the largest literary agency in the whole world. And I said, Marty, I'm writing a book. And he said, oh my God, So, but I said, I don't know what I'm doing. I have 5 chapters. Could you just take them back to New York and have some guy at the agency read them and then either write me or call and say, this is, amazing, keep going, or it's, awful, stop. And he went back to New York with the chapters, and I went back to work in court. And about, a couple of months later, I think it was, I was in trial, and we recessed about 5:30, and I got back to the office, and I thought everyone would be gone, but they were sitting around with champagne. So I said, gee, what happened? Did someone win a case? And they said, no, your agent called, which I didn't know I had an agent, and they sold your book. So Marty, without asking me, had sold the book. Marty had asked the guy at the agency who had never sold the book. He was brand new. He wasn't even a real agent. He was an apprentice agent. And he had been a secretary to an editor of pocketbooks. Guy was pretty famous. And he decided rather be an agent than a secretary. And Marty said, my friend in Oregon wrote this, see what you can do with it. And he got the brainstorm to call up his old boss, and the boss liked it. And then I had a book contract. So that is not the way it usually works out. I was walking around, shaking my head and saying, how did this happen? So it was a lot of fun, though, to actually write the book. And then I wrote another book in 1980. That came out in 78, another Last Innocent Man in 81. And then I stopped for 12 years because my law practice got very exciting. But that's basically the way I broke in. And then I wrote my third book, Gone But Not Forgotten, 12 years later, and that sort of launched me.
I got a note a minute ago from the attorneys representing Annie Bloom's bookstore. They said, in part of that answer, Phil said, quote, "I've done 30 homicides myself," and quote, "they'd like me to point out he meant that as an attorney."
No, I've actually killed 30 people. That's where I get all the ideas from. I mean, you got to write. You got to write what you know, isn't that?
You got to write what you know. Absolutely.
I've stopped, once my wife said, now that you're, a celebrity, you've got to stop doing that. So I haven't killed anyone in years, but.
Okay, another fun fact about Phil, Gone But Not Forgotten, was sold to more than 25 foreign publishers and was made into a miniseries starring Brooke Shields. Pretty fascinating. 2022 is, I'm just going to say it, a hell of a year for you. You're going to have 2 books released in a single calendar year. Not many of us get to say that ever. And correct me if I'm wrong, they're 2 Robin Lockwood books, I think.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the next in the series?
Oh yeah, this is. I'm having more fun with this. It's currently back in New York being edited, so we've been going through the editing process. But it's scheduled to come out November 8th of this year, and it's an homage to Agatha Christie. And Robin is hired by a man he's in a wheelchair as a result of a horrible accident. So he can't come to her office in Portland. And he lives in Black Oaks. Black Oaks is a brick by brick copy of a haunted manor that is on the English moors. And the manor has a curse and a werewolf legend. And his wife, who died in the crash that paralyzed him, had millions of dollars that she inherited and was obsessed with European history. So she decided to make an exact replica with secret passages and dungeons on top of Solitude Mountain. And so the task that Robin has is to free a man from death row. And she does this. And so Frank Melville, who's the person who hires her, insists that they have a party at Black Oaks to welcome Jose Alvarez as a free man. And when they get there, of course, there's a dark and stormy night with a terrible storm. The road is washed out. And they learn that a serial killer who's insane has escaped from the hospital for the criminally insane and is somewhere on the mountain. And my most fun thing is that there is a locked room murder. Somebody is stabbed to death in a old cage elevator that is stuck between the 2nd and 3rd floors. So you can't get out of the cage. And the murder weapon is this dagger from the Black Oak legend. And the handle is a silver, and it's half man, half wolf, but it's too thick to fit through the bars. So the killer had to be inside the cage when he committed the murder. And how did the killer get out? Because the cage is stuck between the floors. There are people coming up from the ground floor and down from the 3rd floor when the alarm in the elevator goes off. And so I had just a wonderful time doing a little Agatha Christie for Robin. having her trapped with a serial killer, and there were other possible murderers in the house. And it's the most fun I've had, I think, writing a book.
Another quick fun fact about Phil, and by the way, Phil and I have a lot in common as both mystery writers here in Portland. All of Phil's novels have been bestsellers. All of his novels have been bestsellers. One of those things he and I have in common, because all of mine have not. We're not going to dwell on that a lot. I'm not sure exactly how to word this exactly. You have a fondness for junk science, and the book that's coming out right now has a bit of that going on in there. Talk a little bit about your how you came up with the twist in this book.
Okay, so people are always asking me, how did you get the idea for the book you wrote? And that's the hardest thing for me. Writing is very easy for me. Once I get my idea and I get my ending, the writing's a snap. I don't have a problem. But what terrifies me every time I finish a book is, am I going to be able to get an idea that's big enough to fill up a 400-page book? And so I really get very nervous about that. And fortunately, these things come from all sorts of weird places. So I stopped practicing as a lawyer in 1996, but I maintained my membership in the Oregon Bar and the National Association, or the Oregon Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, which is a fantastic organization. And they put on wonderful seminars that really help you be a better lawyer. Well, they had a 2-day seminar in 2000, I think it was either 19 or 18, about junk science. And junk science, for those of you who don't know, in a trial, sometimes a prosecutor will put on something that is supposed to be scientific, but is questionable. I'll give you a great example. There's a book called Anatomy of Innocence, which I would urge everybody to read. It's a fabulous book. And it's a nonfiction. And the people who have the Innocence, it's similar to the Innocence Project in Chicago, put this together to help finance their program. And they got a bunch of best-selling authors and assigned them to an exoneree, somebody who had been sentenced to prison for murder when they didn't commit the crime at all. They're completely innocent. And then eventually they were freed from prison. And the guy that I was assigned to was put in prison for, I think it was close to 30 years. And some of the evidence was insane. There was a guy who claimed to have a corpse sniffing dog. And he claimed that the dog could smell the corpse and would then be able to smell people and identify a person that had touched that corpse. And that was part of the testimony against the guy that I was representing. This was later, I think it was 60 Minutes had an expose on this guy. There was a judge in, maybe it was California, I can't remember, who excoriated the guy, said this is absolute nonsense. But it was put forward as science. So they had this 2-day seminar that the Oregon Criminal Defense Lawyers Association hosted. And one of the lectures was about the shaken baby syndrome. And I vaguely knew what that was. It's a theory that has been used by prosecutors to prosecute people for child abuse when a baby has and it's a triad. And it's retinal hemorrhages. I think it's a cerebral edema, swelling of the brain, and there's a third one. I can't. For some reason, I have a mental block about remembering what the triad is. But if they find these internal injuries, but no external injuries, no bruises on the child, no sign that the child was punched or a fractured skull or anything, they will use this and claim that even though there are no marks on the outside of the body, the child was abused by being violently shaken. And the origin of this thing was fascinating. Back in the 1970s, nobody talked about spousal abuse, child abuse, sort of hushed up. And these doctors were finding these cases where children had this triad, but there were no marks. And so no idea about using this for criminal prosecutions, but they did want to educate people that you shouldn't shake a baby. So they were giving lectures to doctors and to parents and stuff to educate them about this. Well, prosecutors picked up on it and started using it to prosecute people. Now, there's a big problem with doing this. When you have a scientific theory, what you do is you make a hypothesis, and then you test it to see if it works out or if it doesn't. For instance, let's say that I get an idea that if I eat hot dogs, it will cure cancer. Well, we don't know if that's true or not. It's quite possible that if I have cancer and I eat a hot dog, the cancer will go away, but maybe that's not true. Maybe it won't go away. So what do? You do a test. You get a bunch of people with cancer, you have them eat hot dogs, and you see what happens. You can't do that with the shaken baby syndrome. You can't have 1,000 people take children, little babies, and shake them as violently as they can to see if you can create this triad. So there's never, ever been a test of this hypothesis for obvious reasons that you'd be put in prison. So somebody got the idea, it was a neuroscientist, and well, okay, we can't shake the babies, but let's get crash dummies like they use in NASA or in the auto industry, and subject these crash dummies to violent shaking and see what happens. And they got football players initially to shake these dummies, and they found that you could not replicate the amount of force that would be necessary to create this type of brain damage. So there's never been a biomechanical or real life test that proves that this theory is actual science. And so I was just fascinated by this because I didn't know a lot about shaken baby, but I just assumed that it was real. So I said, well, wouldn't it be interesting to have Robin Lockwood representing somebody who's charged with child abuse, and the only basis for the charge is the shaken baby syndrome. And I had a wonderful time doing the research. I called up, first of all, there was a very excellent presentation in the materials from the seminar. So I had that. And then I called up people in the Attorney General's office and the public defender, because there are cases going on in Oregon that were up on appeal where shaken baby had been challenged below. So I was able to get expert testimony on both sides that I could plagiarize, put in the book, but change the facts around to fit Robin's case. And then the best thing that happened was a really good friend of mine, Jeff Weiss, who lives in the condo where I live. He is I think a pediatric neurosurgeon or a pediatric surgeon and knows all about this stuff. And I asked him if he would take a look at, I wrote the scene with the experts testifying in the cross-examination, direct exam. And I said, could you look at this? And he was fabulous. And he rewrote a lot of it for me. And he said, no, you got to do this. Well, you shouldn't do this. You should do this. So Jeff spent a lot of time helping me make this extremely realistic. So, I always sort of joke that people read my books, think that I'm like a Renaissance man, like Leonardo da Vinci, that I know all this stuff about medicine and neutron activation analysis and fingerprinting. I really don't. I rely very, very heavily on experts who actually do know this stuff. But that's how I got the main idea for the case that Robin handles. And then I had to get her back, unfortunately, through a horrible incident, back to Elk Grove, her hometown, where the case takes place.
I think we might stop here and ask Michael, our host, if we have any questions from the audience.
And by the way, I love questions. I basically am self-taught, and I would have loved to have the opportunity to ask somebody, how do you do this stuff? So I'm really open. Any questions you have, I would love to answer, and don't be shy.
Well, there you go. We just have one comment so far from Cher Davidson. Phil, you look just like your dad, Joe. How many years it's been since Gary and I have seen you? I remember how thrilled your parents were when you got that first book published. I remember the story that was going back to that great story of you finding your agent.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cher.
78. So.
That's awesome. In lieu of other questions, although Michael should jump in if he gets some, I'm going to jump for a second away from the shaken baby syndrome to battered women's syndrome, and away from Phil Margolin, the writer, to Phil Margolin, the attorney. You were the first Oregon attorney to defend somebody using the battered women's syndrome. Am I remembering this correctly?
Yeah, I actually pioneered it in 1979 in Oregon. At that time, if a man and woman had a violent relationship and the woman stayed in the marriage, the general idea was that this was a sadomasochistic sexual relationship, and that the woman was enjoying being beaten up, that it was part of a sexual thing. And Dr. Lenore Walker, who was a psychologist on the staff of the medical school at Rutgers in New Jersey, started getting these patients who were very intelligent. That was the other thing. People thought wife battering, just a trailer, someone in a trailer in a wife beater t-shirt, drinking a beer and watching football, and wife steps in front and he slaps her. They thought this was strictly a lower class type of situation. Well, she was getting women who were bankers, lawyers, who were in these abusive situations, highly educated, intelligent women. So she started asking around to other psychologists if they had similar cases, and soon people were referring them to her. And then she got a National Institute of Mental Health grant and went to I think it was Colorado Women's College, and interviewed hundreds of women who had killed their spouses to try to find commonalities. And she came up with this battered women syndrome. And so I had just a horrible case of a woman who had been abused for, I think it was 14 years in the most awful way. And it finally killed her husband. And I was asked by the court to represent her. And somewhere in the back of my head, I remembered something about the syndrome thing. And I was able to hunt down Lenore, and she became my witness. And we had the first case in Oregon where I used used the syndrome, had a psychologist come in and explain why it was self-defense, even though the husband was passed out drunk when he was killed. It wasn't so much a trial as it was a seminar. It was a teaching experience. The woman was, she was found guilty of manslaughter, but the jury actually asked the judge not to give her a harsh sentence, and she got probation with 6 months local jail time, even though she'd beaten her husband to death with a ball-peen hammer and tried to hide the body. I thought she should just get a medal, because this guy was really a horrible, horrible person. So after I did that, I got a reputation for representing, battered women, and I did 4 murder cases where I represented a woman who was accused of killing an abusive spouse. And I used to lecture on it also. I would be asked to go and lecture I did one in Washington, around Oregon, on how do you do this type of case.
I'm going to ask you now about your literary agent, if I could, because how it has gone through your career is you write a mystery, it's a bestseller, your literary agent's happy. You write a mystery, bestseller, happy. mystery bestseller happy. And then one day you called up and said, Worthy Brown's daughter. What level of cardiac distress did you cause in your literary agent? And tell the audience a little bit, if you could, about how the hell this book, which is so different from a Phil Margolin book, came about.
Yeah, it's a very interesting story. It took me 30 years to write it, so I don't think I'll be doing a sequel unless I live to be, I'm gonna have to live to be over 100 to do it. But what happened was I had a 12-year gap between writing my first two books and writing my third. So the same year that my first book came out, I argued at the US Supreme Court, and my daughter was born, so it's a pretty good year. And then in between the two books, I started getting hired to do major murder cases and appeals. So everything I'd wanted to do since I was a little kid, and read Perry Mason books, which is what got me into this, started happening in real life. So what happened was, sometime during that 12-year gap, I read an article about Holmes v. Ford, which was the 1890, was it 1853 Oregon Territorial Supreme Court case that held that you could not have slaves in Oregon. And that was really up in the air. And there were about 70 slaves in Oregon in the 1840s and 50s. People don't think of us as having slaves here, but there actually was a little area called Little Dixie, where slave owners, mostly from Missouri, had moved to Oregon and had brought slaves. And Colonel, let's say his Nathaniel, I haven't looked this for a while, but Colonel Holmes had Nathaniel Ford had moved from Missouri to Oregon because he had been a wealthy landowner in Missouri with many slaves, and then the economy went belly up. So he had to sell off some of the slaves, and he decided he had to move. And in those days, if you weren't successful someplace, you just moved. And Oregon was giving a free square mile of farmland to anyone who would farm it for free. And if you're married, you'd get 2 square miles. So he told the Holmes family of slaves that he owned, their husband, wife, Robin and Polly, and then their children, that if they would come to Oregon and help him develop a farm, he would free them. And they did come, they did help him, and then he reneged on the promise. He freed the husband and wife, but he said that the children had been small and couldn't work, and he had fed them and clothed them. And now that they were older, he wanted to get his money back, money's worth. So Robin and Polly wanted their kids, but they were illiterate. It was illegal to teach, educate slaves in Missouri. So they were illiterate, obviously didn't know anything about law, and they were able to get the prosecuting attorney for Oregon to represent them and sue for return of the kids. And there was eventually a legal decision by, I think it was George Williams was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, that there could not be slavery in Oregon and the kids had to go back. Well, one of the children died in Holmes, in Ford's custody. And I just, not as a writer, but as a person, found this heartbreaking, that someone could kidnap your kids, and everyone knows where the kids are, but you can't get them back because of the color of your skin. And then on top of it, one of them dies. So I thought it would make a wonderful novel, but I knew I had never taken, I think I had one history class, and it wasn't Oregon history. I had no idea what it was like to live in the 1800s. What would a lawyer do? Because the main character, besides being Worthy Brown, I cut it down to a father and daughter, Worthy and Roxanne Brown, but the other main character is Matthew Penny, whose wife dies on the Oregon Trail, and he's grieving, and he agrees to represent Worthy. Well, I had no idea what a lawyer did back then. And when you write a book, you've got to make it realistic. So I didn't know, like, how did you get water in I moved it to 1860 because that's when Lincoln was running for president and slavery was a major issue. How did you get water? Did you have faucets? Did you have to go to a well? Did people brush their teeth? You know, that's all the stuff that you have to write if you're going to make your book realistic. So I spent about 6 years in the Oregon Historical Society library in the Multnomah County Library researching all this. And then I wrote a draft and I sent it to my agent. And she said, this is a horrible book. This is awful. No one will ever publish this book. So I said, okay, you know, because I was making my living as a author, and I mean as a lawyer, and it had been fun doing the research. So then years later, when I had several bestsellers, I had a dead spot because I had finished the book way before deadline. And I said, what will I do next? And I said, oh, there's that historical novel. So I took it out of mothballs and reread it and said, oh my gosh, this is a problem. That's the problem. Rewrote it, sent it in to my agent. And she said, this book is horrible. If we try to get this published, your career will be destroyed. So I said, okay. And I went and wrote some more best-selling legal thrillers. And then several years later, I had a whole bunch of bestsellers and movies and stuff. And I had another dead spot. And I said, well, maybe I'll look at that historical novel again. So I did another rewrite on it. And I sent it to Jennifer Welch. Now, Jean Nagar had been my editor, my agent for years. And then she became semi-retired and her daughter took over. And she had never seen the book. So I gave it to her and she said, Phil, this book is awful. It's horrible. But she sat down and explained why. And as soon as she explained what the big problems were, I said, oh, okay. I went back to Oregon, rewrote the book from scratch, and HarperCollins bought it. And it's the book I'm proudest of. I think it's the best thing I've ever done. But it was totally rewritten from, you know, page one all the way to the end. And I think it's, you know, really, really good book now, and it's gotten wonderful reviews. But it did take quite a while before it was born in the proper form.
I think we may be running out of time. Michael, do you want to sing us out?
I don't know if I'll be doing any singing, but we want to know, Cher wants to know what the title of the book is again.
The new one?
No, the old one. I think, oh, there we go. The Darkest Place.
Worthy Brown's Daughter.
Worthy Brown's Daughter is the one.
That's the historical novel.
Yeah. Like, okay. Cher is nodding her head. She's happy. Good. Yes, thanks everyone for coming tonight. And thanks to Phil and Dana. This is being recorded. It'll be up on our YouTube channel later on. That link will be on the same link that you found this Zoom event link on. So you can go and tell people there to check it out if they weren't able to come here tonight. And it'll be up there forever if you want to watch it again. Yes, Zara, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a really good night, and we'll hope to see you soon.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, folks.